All right, so I think since we have probably a lot of people with burning questions at this point, we'll skip right ahead to the more open dialogue piece here. All right, so I guess we'll stand on each side and just take your questions as they come. We got about 45 minutes for questions and discussion. Fire away. All right, we got one up there. Dan, if you want to run the mic up.
We have there's someone over there.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Hi. Hi. I just have a question, 3 short questions. One is adult and youth with mental health problem when they are held accountable for assault. For example, during treatment, hitting someone at the hospital, or found to be stealing, or under influences. How do we help not to send them for more trauma, such as to self-detention jail? Rather, what option can be looked at?
Okay, so we got 3 questions.
Sorry, can I just ask someone to rephrase that, because it's
Yes.
really hard to hear
So
up here.
I'll start with the first question that I think you asked. Basically, how can we manage challenging or abusive behavior in healthcare or community-based programs without resorting to exposing people to legal problems or to being arrested? Is that correct? As your first question?
Okay, let's start with question 1.
You might not like the answer, but obviously if an assault has occurred on a caregiver or another individual of the public, then we, the police, if we are called, will investigate, and if appropriate, we will lay charges and arrest the individual.
So I agree with that. I think that's the responsibility of the police, absolutely. But where I think there's systems built in is, for example, the mental health court. So if the charges are laid, but it turns out the actions occurred in the context of an active mental health issue, there are opportunities for mental health diversion. For example, if the charges are relatively sort of light, mental health diversion means that somebody can agree to a mental health treatment program or agree to be voluntarily involving themselves with services in the community to address their mental health issues. And if the person is willing to agree to that and the Crown attorney is on board, then that person can be sent to mental health diversion, which means that those charges don't necessarily have to come to jail time or time in custody, as long as that person is still pursuing those mental health treatments. So that is certainly an option that is available to some people who become criminally charged in the context of active mental health issues.
Great, and Cindy, this is kind of your cup of tea here, so you have clients that are probably punching people all day and not going to jail, so how do you do that?
I think what we do is we try to link the clients to meaningful activities in the community, whether accessing programs through the DSO, accessing drop-ins, accessing things from the mental health sector, connecting people to social groups, really focusing on, creating goal plans and connecting them to things and supports during this time.
Okay, so the second question was, how do we alleviate some of the burden on parents or loved ones who are acting as caregivers when they're experiencing financial issues or they're just living with the stress of taking care of their children who may be adults, and they have to keep them at home because they have no other options. There are no placements available. So what sort of supports are available, or where could they be going for help?
So usually some of the clients that I work with and their families, I ensure they're connected through services through the access point, which is the umbrella of all the mental health services. I ensure they're connected to the DSO if they have a developmental disability, linked to services there. I look at formal and informal supports in the community. So just the programs that Parks and Rec might have, the programs that the library might have, just ensure the client is on all the waiting lists. A good situation like this would be to advocate to try to access a family support worker or case manager to support the family and the client through this process of finding appropriate things in the community.
I actually just have a question, Cindy. So, like, I'm a family member and I'm feeling overwhelmed. What's my first step? Like, how do I find these resources?
So, first of all, there's lots of support groups for families, and there's a lot of resources that come out of those things. As well, it depends kind of what area you need the support in. So relevant to today's discussion, which is dual diagnosis, I would definitely call the DSO. The intake people will help connect you to service there, and there's a lot of resources available and a lot of programs to be connected to. There is wait lists for programs though, and that's why you have to be creative and look at what's going on in your community center, what's going on, through different things in your community. For some of my clients, I often build support systems just by maybe them going to the pharmacy and getting their medication there as opposed to their parents giving them their medication or things like that. I just really want to ensure that supports are in place. And that another way is to access through the doctor. Your family doctor might be able to connect to supports as well.
I think also 211. 211 is a good resource to start if you're not someone with a developmental disability. But looking at kind of broader social service resources, that kind of thing, is also a place to start again.
And Tom has kindly reminded me that CAMH also has a service that's called Access CAMH. And Lavinia at the beginning mentioned the little business cards that we have up at the table at the back, which has the contact information for Access CAMH, and they can give information on not just CAMH services, but what services might be available in the community.
Thank you. So before we move on to the next question, excellent questions there. I would just ask that for each person, phrase it as a single question so we can get through as many people as possible. So I think we have one up there.
Hi, good day. I work in municipal licensing and standards, and we work a lot with people within a lot of our complaints are bylaw driven. Sometimes some of the complainants that we're dealing with, the complaints are questionable. Voices in their head, they're swearing at their neighbors, and it becomes, my neighbor, there's a noise complaint, or I'm seeing things, there's things in the ear and stuff like that. So we're at a bylaw perspective where it's pretty black and white. This is not a violation, but you have this person calling me every week or something like that, and you're trying to help. Where do we go? Are we allowed to make referrals or something like that? Because I've tried to reach the public health and vulnerable adults before in the past, and a lot of it is, they have no consent, or if they don't think there's a problem, there's not very much we can do. So within the bylaw framework, what can we do to help these people other than just keep closing their files?
Great question. Any thoughts?
It kind of goes to the question I jokingly asked earlier about how much can you share, what information can you share without consent, right? And kind of where are the first stops for people?
Well, from a policing aspect, there's obviously, from an MCIT perspective, you hit the nail on the head. If they're hearing voices and it's part of their illness, there's nothing wrong with it. That's part of their illness. It's not like you're breaking the law or anything. But if that's that concerned citizen or et cetera, you could, one avenue I would encourage would be have an agency bring that to the situation table. Now, it might not meet an acutely elevated risk, but it could meet a lower threshold where they could still be put in touch with other community agencies.
I think it can be helpful for sort of any people in the sort of civil service or for any agencies to keep handy a list of these kinds of resources that we've talked about, whether it's CODA or the DSO or Access CAMH or government services. I think it's very useful for agencies that deal regularly with the public, those people that have that interface to just have a list of names and phone numbers of the kinds of places that provide these services, so that you have your resource book that you may not be able to directly get involved with the situation, or it may not be within your purview, but at least you've got at hand a list of places to say, like, I can't help you, but have you considered calling the, which might sort of at least give you something to say.
And just dovetailing onto that, I'm sure the bylaw officers have access to this. It's in partnership with Ryerson University, Toronto Police last year rolled out a community access portal, which is web-based, and it's geographical based as well. So you, depending on where you are located, you can search for community partners and agencies. And then there's also Connects Ontario, which also has a web-based application where you can find resources, because ultimately that's what you're going to need is resources and partnerships.
So I guess part of what I'm looking for here, so we would not be, I wouldn't be overstepping by making an assumption that I'm questioning how capable or mentally well the individual before me is, because I don't want to violate anybody's right and start reaching out to agencies and then they feel like they've been offended by my interpretation of their behavior.
So I don't know if this panel is in a position to comment specifically on your role and what the boundaries of that role might be, but I would encourage you to speak to your supervisors, to talk about the strategies, and within your particular context, what are the boundaries of where you can and cannot go. And I think that, you know, for any agencies or individuals who are having frequent contact with these kinds of situations, some advanced planning and understanding of what you can do and what some strategies are can be very empowering, and can also mean you're making a difference out in the community for people who may just be reaching out because they need someone to reach out to and they don't know where else to call.
And maybe just creating some sort of a resource booklet or like an envelope full of resources and generically giving them. So you're not assuming one thing, but you're saying here's some supports if you need an array of supports that might be helpful.
And I was going to say, for those of us in developmental services, I know the Community Network and the Griffin Center is partnering to do some education to the different police divisions, the frontline officers, on what is a developmental disability, really easy tips on how to recognize it, how to approach someone. We'd be happy to engage with your team as well, if that would be helpful, to kind of do some more of that just general education around developmental disabilities for sure.
I just want to comment as well, because we work with SPIDER, we work very closely with municipal licensing and standards. And I guess this would go for any city division or even community agencies that are responding to something where they've got some concerns. Unless we are concerned that there is an immediate threat to life, it's okay to slow things down and not respond, not give out the information package immediately. It's okay to just establish rapport during that first visit, kind of think about things, consult with your colleagues, and go back and do another visit, maybe with another staff or with someone from a partner agency. We don't have to have all the answers, even though we want to. We don't have to have all the answers right away, and we don't need to act immediately. It's okay to slow down and take that time to establish rapport, to think things through. We could argue on the one hand that it creates more work for us, but actually in the long run, if we're acting with thoughtfulness and with taking a strategic approach, we end up doing a better job, and that eliminates the problems that we were dealing with in the first place.
All right, great. Next question.
We're going to come over here.
Okay, so the question I do have with all the professionals that are here, it's in regards to someone's their rights and their quality of life, in the sense of they've decided that they're going to eat whatever they want, whenever they want, and clearly it's you see manifestation on their physical form and their wellness, which, so the question I'm posing in regards to the circle of care, if anyone have any idea how we sort of give the conversation to this individual?
Sure. So, Tom, I think I've heard you answer the question like this before, so I wonder if you want to weigh in.
So the challenge is an individual does not have an obligation to act in their own best interests. necessarily. So they can, and as a human person, I have the right to do things that are destructive to me. I have the right to smoke if I want, right? Is that in my own best interest? Probably not in the long run. So the challenge is, if somebody's behaviors are self-destructive and not crossing certain lines, there's not a lot you can do to prevent it, short of being involved with them in terms of having conversations around, is there something that I might be able to do to help you if I notice that your behaviors are destructive to you or harmful to you? What supports, if any, might you be interested? Can I work with you? But it's really much more of a soft approach. And the classic example I like to use is the person that shows up to dialysis with a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken, right? Why are you at dialysis if you're sitting there eating greasy, salty chicken the whole way through your dialysis? You're undoing it as it's being done, right? Can I force you to not eat the chicken while you're at dialysis? If you have the capacity to appreciate and understand, I probably can't, right? Now I can talk to you and inform you about the risks of that behavior, of the alternatives to that behavior, but at the end of the day, however distressful it is sometimes, we unfortunately have to let people behave in ways that we might not find to be healthy and good for them, but if they have the ability, then they have the right.
Do we have another question? We got one at the back there. I wonder if we could run a mic up there. She ran away, so we got to.
Hello, thanks for this. A systemic response to these really complex needs sounds so very expensive as we're sitting here today. And I keep thinking about the ACE study, the adverse childhood experiences that so many of us have had, and we know that many unresolved negative health outcomes for adults are because of results of unresolved childhood traumas. We know that a lot of substance abuse is a coping mechanism in response to that mental health reality. What role does the early years and family supports play in our systemic response? I know the case scenarios are about folks already living it. What perspective can we represent that reminds us that a front-loaded investment gives us a really strong social return on investment?
So can I might be able to give you an example of where that was addressed several years ago. The example was we recognized in this province that we had an issue with lack of access to primary care physicians. The result being that people were defaulting to going to emerge to be treated for things that they should have addressed with a primary care physician because they didn't have access to one. And the result was what we understood and knew was you were using the most inefficient, most expensive way to do what could be done more efficiently and less expensively if we diverted resources into ensuring that people had access or greater access to primary care physicians. And so 10 years ago, the situation was one thing. Today, the situation is something very different in terms of we have far more people, not everybody, but we have far more people due to a concerted provincial effort to get them access to a primary care physician than we did 10 years ago. So your question, is there something in the system that we could model so that, because what we do know is if we don't address it in early childhood and it manifests in later life, the ability, first of all, to address it effectively is reduced. The cost and resources associated with affecting it are far more than they would have been on the front end. But preventative medicine is not always the bandwagon people jump on. So it's advocacy, I would think, right, in terms of, can you make a business case for it? That's what they did with the family physician thing. You made a business case and said, you know, it's going to cost us $50 billion less to do it this way than this way. That sounds reasonable.
And I know for developmental disabilities, they're putting more and more money into early childhood intervention and early intervention and early supports for autism and that kind of thing. So I think there's a recognition that some of that work needs to be done on the front for sure. Yeah. Rona.
So I actually kind of wanted to get back to the first question that this lady over here had about, and I may have sort of forgotten the crux of your question, but individuals who are brought to the emergency department either by the police or their family members, or have presented themselves that are in crisis and then misbehave and end up with charges of assault. So for me, this is a larger ethical question that I'm not sure if you guys answered for me, being on the receiving end potentially of these individuals working at the mental health court. And so these are folks that were in crisis, that misbehaved, sometimes as a result of interventions that happen at the hospital that they may or may not have given consent for. Potentially there's no time to even do that sort of capacity assessment as to whether or not they want to have something injected or whatever. And so yes, mental health diversion is offered generally for individuals that end up there, but ethically, is this the right approach? I mean, if people are presenting at the hospital because they want help and end up with charges. Now, on the other hand, I know that everyone has the right to work in a safe environment and not be assaulted at work, but what are some of the issues here? I mean, legal systems or players want to push back sometimes, but clearly, again, it has to be a safe place to work, so.
I want to add one thing also, that I witnessed some of the issues then when I voluntarily advocate for some of the people that I came in touch with, is that diversion. Sometimes diversion has another issue that I experienced was, if they use, for example, had a criminal history involved, and then later on, when there is a mental health is diagnosed, diversion doesn't help them. And why not? It's something that I'm hoping, and that's something that needs to be looked and revised to.
And so just coming back to Rona's point, I think this is going to be an incomplete answer to the big question that you've asked. But when I spoke at the outset about rights-based care, I think that's a really important perspective for healthcare providers, particularly in emergency rooms, where you have people who are coming in crisis. If they're coming in on a form, psychiatric facilities hold this huge package of power in terms of the extent to which they can restrict people's liberty. If someone's incapable, the extent to which they can be given medications, the use of restraints, all of this stuff. And I really believe strongly that it's critical that healthcare providers are, especially in the psychiatric field where the law and healthcare are so intertwined, that healthcare providers really educate themselves about the rights of the patients, and the need to do fulsome assessments, even when that's not entirely convenient. And I work with our emergency department. We have our wait lists are so long. There's people coming through the door. It's the middle of the night. There's chaos everywhere. But I think that there's a real obligation to be aware of patients' rights and doing what we need to do in terms of providing care, but doing it in a way that is recognizing that we don't really, in the long term, I think finding the balance between people's rights and making sure the care they get is how we ensure their long-term success. And that if we don't attend to people's autonomy and their rights from the get-go, then we're really setting up our whole system for failure. And so I think that education piece and that knowledge piece on the part of healthcare providers is a critical aspect of all of these things.
Something I might add to that is one of the challenges is the work time pressures around all of that. Doing what Kendra's suggesting takes a lot of time, right? When in an emergency room context, there isn't always a lot of time to do that. And I think everybody who is a healthcare worker or provider needs to think for themselves where they are willing to accept compromise in perhaps quality, compromise in perhaps promoting rights for expediency and time, right? And so that is a professional practice and professionalism question is, will I take the 2 or 3 hours it would require to do this way because it's right, or will I take a shortcut and do something in 15 minutes that's less right, and I realize it's less right, but I need to do that and I'm comfortable doing it because I need to move on to something else. And so how do you as a provider or anybody who has multiple tasks to complete in a limited amount of time and far more tasks to complete than the amount of time you have available to do it, where are you cutting corners? Where are you compromising? And why are you compromising where you're compromising? And can you live with that? Because we all do that every day. We are all resource allocation issues because we have more to do than we can get done. How do we allocate ourselves as a resource in a way that we can be comfortable with in the context of our professional obligations?
Hello. Thank you for organizing this. This is certainly great. My name is Catherine. I work in the mental health addiction and crisis intervention field for 30 years in Toronto. I've seen quite a bit, and I am impressed of the new situations that I'm encountering. So the question to you, I don't know if you're going to welcome those questions, but I would like to hear what each of you, in your own capacity, in your own work, are involved right now to change the flawed system that we are dealing with. Because we have answers on those questions that we are asking right now, but we all know, we all here, I can imagine, we all know that we are still facing a lot of challenging situations, and that the system is very fragmented. And there are systems that are not talking to each other. The one main example I can provide with you is we in community, we are now doing what is called coordinator care plan for each client of ours. And let me tell you, when I bring the client to the hospital, I cannot get that plan into the documentation, into the hospital. So everybody who deals with the client in the hospital is reinventing the wheel if I don't go personally, which I don't have time to do, to voice to them what I'm doing with them. In the community, huge resources, a lot of hours put in the work. So that's one example. So I would like to know what Kendra, what Thomas, what Constable, and what everybody or you now, from the point of your organization, is doing to actually change the flawed system right now.
Great question. All right, so maybe just per agency, we can talk about a program or an approach where we're dealing with things like service redundancy, the funding issues, the capacity issues, all the things that kind of face us in our day-to-day jobs in supporting mental health. One at a time, I don't care who goes first. What is something that your organization is doing to try to fill some of those gaps? Thank you for that question.
So from Toronto Police perspective, we're doing several things, and we recognize it is a transformative shift for us, is that we understand that Toronto Police can't do everything for everybody. And so we are actively collaborating with as many partnerships as we can. The MCIT is pretty much an example of that. It is a collaboration between two systems, the healthcare system, and then vis-a-vis as it trickles down to community agencies. But in terms of if an MCIT team were contacted by your agency, the nurse would definitely take whatever you had to say in consideration. It's considered collateral information. And that would be one way of getting that information, because you probably know that client better than anyone else does in terms of the immediate situation. The next layer that we're involved in, and it's rolling out more and more, is the focus tables, right? Where we're accessing multiple agencies at one time. So, and even from a criminal perspective, our gang strategy is now incorporating community agencies, etc. Right? So it's not, we recognize that we are just one component in a greater system, and that's where we're addressing things. And keep in mind that we're regarded as one of the few agencies that's open 24/7, but as the doctor said here, we have resource limitations and resource issues, and maybe we're not the people that should be dealing with it not because we don't want to, but that's not our expertise, and we're maybe not the appropriate agency in the first place because we're not resourced and organized that way.
And I can speak a little bit about from the hospital perspective and MCIT. So one of the things that August and I have been doing is conducting an environmental scan of emergency department practices, mainly with our 6 partner hospitals, but with some other hospitals within Toronto as well. Because the number one area that our teams identified as a barrier is getting people into emergency departments quickly. People with mental health issues are waiting, and we don't know if they're being seen as quickly as other people who may have been evaluated as having a same level of crisis as them, like someone who is coming in with a heart attack versus somebody who's coming in active psychosis. We don't know if they're being treated the same. We don't think that they are, but we need a little bit more evidence around that. So we are trying to find out some of those best practices and see if we can make suggestions to other hospitals or say, this is what we found is useful at this hospital, can you apply it there? There are some obvious challenges with that. We can't tell hospitals how to run their emergency departments or how to change their processes, but we really try to come from a place of evidence-based information and kind of try to work with people that way. We're also working a lot more closely with the local health integration networks with this new tool that's come out where all the agencies within Toronto will be connected. We can hopefully look at things like what services people are accessing, how often they're coming in and out, and then we can try to get ahead of those sorts of things. And then again, we can do things like August mentioned, the focus tables, bring people to the focus tables where they can get that wraparound care and have everything hopefully addressed more effectively.
And I just want to add that recently Toronto Police Service revised our procedures in how we deal with people in crisis, and officers now have the discretion whether they will handcuff somebody. And on the surface it might not seem like a big thing, but it is a big thing, right? Keeping in mind that it's always up to the individual officer how he or she may determine their own safety as well as the safety of the public, etc. But if the officer determines that it's safe to do so, they won't handcuff. Or conversely, let's say they do handcuff, they arrive at the hospital, and now the client has settled down and the behavior has changed and it's for the better. They have that discretion to take the handcuffs off. Okay, so that's a big mindset change for us as police, right?
So, and I think from a CAMH, one CAMH point of view is that one of the strategic pillars within the CAMH model of care is advocacy at large. And so I think a real good example of that in the last year has been CAMH's advocacy for safe injection sites, right? So recognizing there was a real critical problem in the community, recognizing that that process was and is long, complex, and involved, CAMH has taken a lead in saying we really need something in place now, and as an organization, because of the population we serve, advocating for those sites to be up and running sooner rather than later.
Another tangible example from the CAMH perspective is that we have a partnership with corrections so that we actually have mental health teams in the jails. So at Toronto South Detention Centre, for example, we have a team that is full-time at the South that does screening for mental health issues of all people coming into the Toronto South Detention Centre and are available to provide not only assessment and treatment recommendations, but also case management services, because often what will happen is someone gets charged with an offense, they come into a remand center like the South, and either after their charges are taken care of, or if their charges are stayed, then they sort of drop away from services in the community, and then, you know, it's a kind of a lather, rinse, repeat of situations where they don't have supports, they reoffend or are alleged to have reoffended, and then they end up back. And a lot of the individuals going through the Toronto South Detention Centre are the same individuals that are going through CAMH and cycling through our emergency room. So that team is there to help individuals get treatment recommendations, but also set them up with services in the community so that when they're no longer at the detention center, they have housing and they have caseworkers in the community, and they have a sort of access to resources to hopefully set them up for better success in the community. And that's a project that has been very successful, and that is being expanded to other detention centers around the province as well.
Can I just say, I know I'm not on the panel, but it's funny that you talk about coordinated care plans. I was just at a meeting yesterday led by the Acute Care Alliance, which is all the TC Lynn hospitals, talking about how to identify individuals with developmental disabilities when they first come into the emergency room. So is there a quick way that we can figure this out to make their experience better? Do they need to wait in a smaller room? Can they not be in crowds? Like all of these kind of things. And it's funny because none of these hospitals have the same processing system or the same database or the same, so you literally can't use the same kind of care plans and all of the, so it's so interesting. But there are, so for us it's around specifically DS, but I think it's very transferable. So how do you identify someone with a mental health issue when they first come in, that kind of thing. So there are some higher level funded projects going on looking at some of this stuff to break down some of those silos. And the Community Networks of Specialized Care was created specifically to break down some of those silos. So I think it's not always evidenced to the frontline people and to the people doing all of the hard work, but there are some higher level projects, research, that kind of thing going on to look at how to break down some of these barriers for sure.
I'm also not on the panel, but one of the things that you mentioned and that you just brought up also is just the siloing between health services and how challenging it can be to get information across, and there's some redundancy that happens. You know, people are telling their story over and over and over again. They've already told it to 20 people, right? Connecting GTA.
I calculated with the clients that I got to the hospital 7 times.
7 times telling the same story. And that's at one hospital. And then they probably go to another service and they're doing it all over again 7 more times. But you know, connecting GTA and connecting Ontario, as you mentioned, really for the first time, healthcare professionals are able to log in and see the data and test results, etc., from 8 different hospitals and partners. So I can log in for a client who's been admitted to another ER and see exactly what's going on, what the test results are, and that's new. Instead of doing like a health records request, waiting 2 weeks for it to be faxed over, it's the wrong one. So I think that's a big step in Ontario. And then I would just do another CAMH plug where I think that we like this idea of individuals nicely fitting in boxes like schizophrenia or developmental disability, substance user, but that's not what life is like, right? So each individual clients that we have multiple issues across domains, right? So they can have acquired brain injury, a mental health issue, a substance use disorder, and a developmental disability all at once. And so, which unit do you go to? And I think we're starting to see either with the partnerships of the Network of Specialized Care, with Quota, and some of the other partnerships here, the development of services that cross those barriers. Our service, the Forensic Dual Diagnosis Specialty Service, was born out of this idea that it's not as easy as having a developmental service program and a forensic program, and that people get caught in the lurch when they're a person with ID in the forensic system and they don't fit. So our program is one of those examples of trying to identify the unique needs of someone who might have multiple issues and justice involvement. But all right, Cindy, I'm wondering, what are you doing to save the world?
Well, I think CODA is moving forward with a lot of collaboration and partnerships with community agencies and hospitals, recognizing that we can all work together to support these complex clients. And as already highlighted, just our service team model with the integrated service teams, just recognizing that you could have a client like Louis was saying with a dual diagnosis and ABI and addiction issues, and how we can all work together to support that client.
All right, I think we have time for one more question, maybe.
Can I just say something about what you said about Connect Ontario?
Sure.
So not all hospitals do it. This is what I learned yesterday. So all of the TC Lynn hospitals do it or are engaged with it, but even that's very fragmented and not all hospitals access it. So
True.
even that piece
I've
is
actually heard
so challenging.
that there's been discussions, and someone may have a bit more information about incorporating long-term care and private even physicians and others, but my understanding is that a lot of that's still in development, but I'd love to see more, more of those connections.
I'm not gonna get you off PGT.
Pull the mic closer. Hold it closer.
And the person from PGT, because I have
You're not off the hook,
actually
PGT. What are you doing?
Yeah, sorry, nothing personal. I just, because I tell you what, currently I work with seniors, and as you know, the population is actually growing, and I outgrew the youngsters in the Ontario, so the problem is not going away, it's growing. And it's staying there because we live longer. So I work with seniors, and I have quite a bit of very great experience with PGT. Extremely well. What I'm hoping for in the future, and that's my suggestion, is there is a lot of people that I have with PGT workers, but there is nobody who can actually collaborate with stores like No Frills or low-end stores, so to speak, to deliver the shopping. There is nobody, the people who have no funds for that. Yes, they will pay for the shopping, but they will not go there, and they will not pick it up. Okay, can PGT look into it and collaborate so that you will have the list of the stores that as the workers we can collaborate with them and hook them with our clients?
So here's the problem with the PGT and something like that, because of course that would be great. You mean, so basically set up an account with like a grocery gateway type? Right. So the problem is that the public or interest doesn't have one credit card that we can use. Like most of these places, you have to use a credit card to be able. I personally, I have advocated myself because, and I'm not the only one. I mean, it would solve so many problems. I think it's a logistic situation with a government agency that, you know, we manage, like I said, so many, I think it was 11,000 clients of their finances, and you know, they don't accept, like we send checks, like we're still in the, right, we're like, here's a check. So we're a little bit behind the times, but that's, I think, just the function of a government agency. And so there are some places, like I just found some places more in more a rural location where we can set up an account for a person, for one of our clients. So I did that legwork as an investigator just by chance. And so there are still some places where we can do that, but like downtown Toronto, not as, you know, they don't really have accounts like that, like in sort of the older established grocery stores in smaller communities sometimes would do it.
So,
yeah.
so these may be kind of further discussions, right? The ideas of I think ministries are interested right now in unique collaboration, so I think the more we can talk about it and put together
Pitch those ideas.
proposals and funding and all that stuff.
Maybe time for one more really brief one?
You know what, we've got a closing comment right here.
Okay, closing comment, last one.
Yeah, thank you everyone for this great presentation. I'm a community support worker, and I'm considered still maybe a newcomer, 3 years in Canada. I face with different challenges, and I have 2 children in school. I just want to leave this place, and I want everyone to leave this place, because I feel that most of the pressure was on curing the consequence of these happenings. I just want everyone to think about prevention, which is education. I would like my children to learn about this stuff, or some kind of topics that would help them to engage in society, have that immunization to overcome these issues before facing them. Because I feel that the lack of love and respect and education is the main cause of what we are sitting here and trying to deal with it today. And I just want this to be the last comment in our mind before the weekend. Have a great weekend.
Well said.